Hey everybody, James P. Wagner here again with Local Gems Press. I'm here with Nick Hale. Hey Nick.
Hey James, hi everybody.
And we're back for another little talk about smashing the writer's block, that pesky little thing that pretty much every writer has encountered at one point or another that we all wish we could just smash with a hammer. And that's kind of why we're here, is to just talk about various ways to, just move completely past that writer's block and get right into all kinds of inspiration that will keep our poetry writing going. So today we're talking about found and discovered poems. Inspiration can create more inspiration, and sometimes art imitates art, and that's not cheating. Only if you copy it and you plagiarize it. but plenty of times in all walks of writing, really. I mean, one example that comes to mind right away is Hemingway's "The Sun Also Rises," which was a response to F. Scott Fitzgerald's "The Great Gatsby." And that's a novel being inspired by another novel, coming at it from a different way with whatever the inspirations. Poems can do the same thing. It's very common for people to find poems in other poems or other pieces of writing just in general. And of course there's different ways you would kind of categorize all of these things. But the idea is that you might see a line somewhere that just gets your creative juices flowing and gets you inspired to kind of write, to take that line and continue the line, or take that line and combine it with another line that you saw. And we're just going to talk about a lot of different options for that in this little video. Found poetry is kind of considered to be a form in and of itself, which is a type of poetry where you basically make a poem from selecting random words or lines from different books. You could basically just go to a book on your shelf. You could open up to a random page, and you could look through there and see a few words and combine it with this words and that words. And of course, there's different subcategories of found poetry, but like an example right here, speaking of The Great Gatsby, was a page from that, and somebody here blacked out all the other words except for the words that they wanted to actually create a line here. And that line is, "One autumn night, years before, they came to a place where the moonlight stopped and change was among the stars." And, that's a very poetic line, obviously. And of course, there's a lot of other words that are on this page, but this is kind of what just stood out to them. Not that I would necessarily recommend blacking out your book. Um,
Yeah, there's a bit of a downside to doing that, doing it that way.
Yeah, maybe photocopy it and black it out that way, or something like that, or print out a page from online or whatever. Don't do it in an actual book, please. I own a bookstore. Don't do that in an actual book.
Yeah, put the ebook in paint or something and just cover over.
Yeah, but kind of like that, the scene in A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe with the equations where the codes are jumping out at him, like kind of being highlighted and all that stuff. You could kind of almost, do that with something like this. And again, there's different kind of categories and subcategories of found poetry. Like this would be sort of like, purely a found poetry line in that, but you can basically do a poem where you found, just the first line of a poem in that, like maybe just, one autumn night years before they came to a place where the moonlight stopped, like maybe that would be like the first line or the first couple of lines of a poem, and then you just kind of continue it right from there. There's also the type where you literally just, like you found this line on this page, you would then flip to the next page and you would kind of do the same thing where you would get a line that could kind of correspond with the first one right from the words on that page. Like there's all sorts of challenges for this actually. Sometimes it's like, okay, create a found poem, and people will literally say from the particular pages of this particular book, and they kind of like, do it almost as a competition where they'll kind of pull poems out of it. You'll kind of see what the different people have sort of done. Other times it's like take a line from, this one book, a line from this one book, a line from this book, and you do it that way. And, some people like, think like, oh, this is kind of cheating or whatever, but it's like, no, they're like these words, anybody can use these words. It's all a matter of, the arrangement and all that stuff. And it's a matter of finding the inspiration and how they kind of connect together in things that are pretty much already out there.
Right. It's no more cheating than writing a poem about something that you see. Like, oh, you see a dove fly off into the sunset and you write a poem about it. And it's like, okay, so you're describing what you're seeing. You're taking the imagery that you see and you're putting it on the page. It's the same thing here. You're taking the words that you see and you're arranging them in a way that you think looks pretty. And it doesn't even have to be a book. Like I've seen this done with, I actually was at a workshop where we did this with magazines and newspapers. So you put together a
Mm-hmm.
poem that looks like a ransom note,
Yep.
and it was kind of cool. You cut the words out of each one and put them together. So this is a great way to take something that's not very poetic and turn it into something that's poetic.
Yeah, and just to to go on what Nick was saying, how this doesn't have to be like in a book. I mean, found poetry primarily usually is in a book, but then there's discovered poetry, which is essentially just found poetry by another name. Like I've done this a lot myself, and I know a lot of people have, where it's like you listen to the things that they say in a movie or a television show. Like sometimes, when I'm in the mood looking for inspiration, like I'll be listening to a TV show, and words that just jump out at me, like I'll write those down in like no particular order, and then I'll like rearrange those words to kind of see how they go together in one of my poetry grids, which is like a whole other thing that we'll talk about in another video. Some of you already know that, but interesting lines and phrases, etc. We'll just write them out, and then again kind of see like how they correspond, and then make a poem around them. Sometimes just one line will inspire a poem because I'll like, oh, that's a great line, I want to continue that, or like that's a great line, that's an ending for a poem, and then I'll want to write a poem leading up to that line. Other times, you take these phrases, combine them with these phrases, and it becomes a poem that way. But there's so many ways you could do it, because there's raw material all around us pretty much. And like again, like the people again who might say like, oh, that's cheating. It's like, well, go to the dictionary, like all the words are in there. Is like, would it be cheating if you like took all the words out of that and you made it into a poem? It's like, no, it's it's just a way to inspire. And I know that there are some like people who kind of consider themselves sort of poetry purists and don't like the idea of prompts, even though technically anything is a prompt. Even that, the bird landing in that tree is a prompt. Like pure inspiration, like where it just manifests out of the clear blue sky. I mean, maybe it exists, but I've never seen it. Everything that I've ever seen inspired was inspired by something, and that something can be considered a prompt in any way. And so this is just kind of another version of that, where but it's basically you kind of manipulating the raw material that already exists that most people wouldn't notice in a way, and putting it through a different lens, and then kind of seeing what you can pull out of that. And that is sort of like an inspiration and an art form in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's crazy some of the things you can come up with based on some sources. When I was in college, I was sitting at my desk one day, and a friend of mine was standing next to me, and he was talking and he just started reciting this poem. He came up with the first line himself, but everything else was inspired by stuff on my desk, and specifically the books on my desk, the titles of the books, the little taglines of the books, and the authors' names. And was twisting them into these lines. And at first I thought, wow, that's brilliant. This is such a great poem. I love that line. And then I realized he was just ripping stuff out of the book covers on my desk. I mean, he was putting in some of his own words in between so that it would like make sense, but
Mhm.
but it was just kind of hilarious, and it worked. And sometimes it that's all it takes is just taking pieces and then putting some glue between them and making something good.
Yeah, and and of course, like not every time one does this is it going to come out completely amazing, but you might get some interesting ideas from it. Maybe you'll just get a bunch of like first lines you might use for poems that you're going to then write. Maybe you'll just have a line that you just want to put somewhere because it sounds really good, and you're trying to see what else can come around it. Or maybe when you hear it, it inspires a thought that it's like, okay, so they mean this line that way, but I took it totally different, and then write a poem like entirely about that. There's so many different ways that you can do it, and it's again it's literally
Mhm.
it's basically like solar energy. It's like it's all around us, we just basically need to get the panels to harness it in that regard. And so if one's looking for inspiration, it's pretty much anywhere. And that's the thing, is like from books, TV shows, movies, these are not the only places. It's literally everywhere. Video games, music, I mean, basically, music is just poetry, to, some sound behind it in a lot of cases. Even advertisements. I know there was one poet I know who basically took like all these over the top ads, like, oh, high quality guaranteed, only three payments or whatever. And basically like wrote a poem combining a lot of taglines from that into like just this hilarious poem. Magazines, articles, or even, just imagery. I mean, you get to stuff like copying artwork, or you're inspired by artwork. That would be like ekphrasis, but that's a whole other thing. But, keeping regular observation of the things that you encounter, inspiration is basically sure to follow if you just keep on looking at it through, a unique lens.
Yeah, conversations with stupid people. Like I have more than one poem of overheard conversations. There's one in particular where James and I were actually sitting in a diner after a poetry event, and this guy was speaking very loudly about something he knew absolutely nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
And we both looked at each other at the same time, and I said it first. I said, "I'm going to write a poem about that."
Yep. And I was like, joy. Even though I could have just written one also about it, because you can't copyright weird conversations in a diner, but yeah, inspiration, from all sorts of things. I mean, my best selling poetry book to date was all about stupid stupid things that happened when I worked at a drive through convenience store. A lot of them just conversations with the customer that became sort of found poetry, because literally in some cases using the same exact words and just shaping it into poetic form. One of the Poem a Day people, that we talk about, that we know a lot. I've seen her, sitting at just poetry readings, either book launches, open mics, or whatever, just sitting there with the notebook open, listening to the poems, and then she'll hear like, a couple of words and she'll just like write it down. And basically use that as prompt for, another poem just based off of like the lines or the words that she hears right there. And at another, the poetry event that we do at, the bookstore, that we have on the first Fridays here in New York. There's one guy, I mean, technically what he's doing would be called a cento, where he's taking lines of other people's poems and combining them into another poem, although it's kind of like a group cento, because, he'll be the last one to go at the open mic. And, basically everybody goes first. He'll take like one line that stands out from all of their poems and combine it into, basically adjust the order and combine it into a poem that he basically thinks sounds good. So it's kind of like a collaborative cento. His nickname has become the synthesizer because he basically takes all of our words and puts them together. Yeah, but this is, it's basically just the inspiration is everywhere, as long as one's looking at it with, open eyes, open ears, and, the intent of, basically just, exploring the observation. Again, there's really no limit to, what one can do with this.
Yeah, and as James, you already touched on, there are actual poetic forms that are designed to take from other poems or other pieces of literature, and take lines and use those as the inspiration for your own poem. So to the people who say it's cheating, well, if there are official forms that allow you to do that, then maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, some people maybe it's like, they don't want to take the exact lines because they think that borders a little too much on copying or whatever. But, you've seen, with even established writers, you see, lines inspiring things. I mean, take, from, the poem I Sing the Body Electric, that line became the title of one of Ray Bradbury's books. Obviously obviously that's not copying, considering one is, a Whitman poem and the other is, basically a sci-fi novel. So obviously they're coming at it from different points, but just that line, I sing the body electric, it struck something, with Bradbury. He liked the line and he figured like, oh, I've got a whole different way to,
Mhm.
capitalize on that line, so yeah.
Yeah, the entire Dark Tower series was basically inspired by a poem by Robert Browning. So that's what, 6 books? Oh man, it's a lot of books plus a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, it's amazing where inspiration can come from.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot of exercises where one might specifically, talk about, okay, taking, these lines from this many books and combining into a poem of exactly this many lines. Like there's whole communities that do this out there or whatever, and we might have some, maybe some specific exercises that, we'll, talk to you about a little bit later for that. But yeah, there's, entire communities that basically just love found poetry and what came from that, or discovered poetry. So,
Yeah,
again, keep it open, and keep a notebook handy also, so that you could write these things down, when they're around, because we basically exist with words around us everywhere, both in images, just hearing them, in conversation. It's just so much raw material, so we just have to get better at mining it sometimes.
and refining it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one other thing we didn't touch on is parody, which I would put in this category as well. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like, you're laughing, and sometimes it sounds silly because I know that you've heard some of my parodies before, and I've heard some of yours, and both of them are, all of them are great. Maybe not all of them, but um, sometimes, writing in that style, parodying something specific is a good way to like springboard off into your own stuff,
Mhm.
even when you're doing it so closely that it can't even be considered its own poem because it looks like plagiarism. you know, Sometimes just the art of parodying something is a good way, especially if you're trying to write something funny, but even if you're trying to be serious. Um,
Yeah,
it's a
like one
Yeah,
poem, that a parody poem that always stuck out to me. It was in, I think it was first in Retail Woes, an anthology we did. Kind of inspired by my
I know
chapbook
which one
about
you're talking
working in
about.
that. Yeah, by George Northrup, who's a poet here on Long Island, called the Charge Card Delight Brigade, and obviously a parody on the Charge of the Light Brigade. having to do with like Black Friday and all the sales and all that stuff. And he did it like in the same cadence and the same rhythm as the Charge of the Light Brigade, and it was just I thought it was brilliant. So yeah, there's definitely
Yeah.
a lot of potential of parody poetry too.
People are sometimes down on parody because they think of it as like a joke art form sort of thing, but sometimes parodies can stand as good pieces of art on their in their own right, and sometimes they can even be better than the things that inspired them. So don't make fun of parodies.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of a couple of Weird Al songs that I thought were better than the originals, but I'm not going to say which ones because I don't want anybody to get mad out there. But but yes. Um, so yeah, again, the main thing is we're surrounded by raw material, so mine it and refine it. Um, but yeah, so that's pretty much what we got for you here today on found and discovered poetry and parody poetry. Hopefully, you got something out of this, and we'll definitely try some of these things. And we'll see you next time.
Bye,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody.